My name is Nora Beth Callahan, and I was 32 years old the morning I stood in a church parking lot in my wedding dress and handed my father the keys to the house I'd bought him. It was a Saturday in September. The kind of morning that starts cold and cool and smells like cut grass and someone else's happiness. The church doors were open. My guests were inside. My husband was at the altar. And my parents were 40 minutes away, at my sister's house, watching her grandkids, so she and her husband could spend the weekend in Gatlinburg. My maid of homey name is Nora Beth Callahan, and I was 32 years old the morning I stood in a church parking lot in my wedding dress and handed my father the keys to the house I'd bought him. It was a Saturday in September. The kind of morning that starts cold and cool and smells like cut grass and someone else's happiness. The church doors were open. My guests were inside. My husband was at the altar. And my parents were 40 minutes away, at my sister's house, watching her grandkids, so she and her husband could spend the weekend in Gatlinburg. My maid of honor had just called to tell me. Her voice was careful the way voices get careful when someone has to deliver news that is too ugly for the plain words it requires. Your parents aren't coming, Nora. Something about the kids. They said they couldn't get out of it. I stood in that parking lot with my phone in one hand and my bouquet in the other, and I want to be clear about what I felt, because it wasn't the sharp thing you'd expect. It was the dull, specific weight of confirmation. Not surprise. Confirmation. The kind that comes when something you've been telling yourself wasn't true finally becomes impossible to reframe. I walked back into the church. I married the man I loved. I smiled for every photograph, danced at my own reception, said thank you to every person who had driven hours to be in that room. And on Monday morning, I called my real estate attorney, and I told her I needed to undo a gift. What happened next, what I found when I started pulling at that thread, is the reason I'm telling you this story. Welcome back to Sweet Payback Stories. If you've ever been the one who always showed up while everyone else took you for granted, this story is for you. Subscribe and stay until the end, because sometimes the people doing the most are the ones nobody sees coming. I grew up the second of 3 children in a small house in Harlan County, Kentucky, which is the kind of place where everyone knows who your people are and your people's business is everyone's business, and the word family gets used to justify a remarkable number of things that wouldn't survive 5 minutes of honest examination. My older sister Dana is 40 now, which makes her 8 years older than me. She married young, had 3 kids before 30, and has spent the years since in a particular kind of comfortable chaos, the kind where there's always a crisis and always a reason she can't handle it alone. My younger brother Cole is 28, the baby, which in our family meant he got the latitude that comes with being the last one, the one my parents were finally too tired to be strict with. And then there was me, in the middle, which in our family meant I was the one who handled things. I want to be precise about that word. Handled. Because handled is different from loved, and for a long time I confused the two. When I was 14 and our water heater quit in January, it was me who called the plumber from the phone book, because Dad was working a double shift and Mom was at Dana's helping with the new baby and Cole was 6 and useless in the way that 6-year-olds are useless. I found the number, I described the problem, I let the man in, and I wrote down what he said to tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone I'd done it. I just did it. That was the shape of my childhood. Not unhappy. I want to say that clearly, because the easy version of this story paints everything dark, and that isn't fair and it isn't accurate. My parents were not bad people. They were tired people with limited resources and 3 children who needed different things from them, and the one who needed the least visible tending got the least visible tending, because that's how tired parents sought their attention. They trusted me to handle it. And I did. Every time. Dana needed Mom for everything. The pregnancies, the babies, the marriage trouble in year 4, the car that kept breaking down, the kids' school issues, the holidays she couldn't organize alone, the weekends she needed a break. Mom was there. Dana's life was the main current, and our family flowed in and out of it the way water flows around a big rock. Dad was quieter in his partiality, the way men sometimes are, but it was there. Cole was the son he'd wanted when he got me instead, and Cole got the easy smile and the front row seat to whatever Dad was watching on television. I got the appreciation, the Nora, what would we do without you, which is a lovely thing to hear and a very different thing from being chosen. I moved to Nashville at 22 for nursing school. I sent money home when I could, not much at first, but something, because the habit of helping was so baked into me that not helping felt like failing. By 25, I was an RN working surgical at a hospital in Brentwood, and the money home became a regular wire, $400 a month, because Dad's hours had gotten cut and the mortgage was tight. By 27, I was sending $600 a month. By 29, after Dad's back surgery that kept him off work for 4 months, I had covered $14,000 in medical bills and lost expenses out of my own savings. Nobody asked me to. That's the thing I have to tell you, because it matters for what comes later. Nobody asked. I just looked at the math and I covered the gap the way I'd always covered every gap, the way I'd covered it since I was 14 and the water heater quit. What I got in return, for most of those years, wasn't nothing. I got the Noras so good to us at Sunday dinner when I visited. I got the warm pride of being the reliable one. I got to feel useful, which had become, over 30 years, the thing I mistook most frequently for love. The house was my idea, and I want to own that. My parents had been renting for years. They'd lost their original house in 2012 when Dad got laid off during the refinery closure, and they'd been in a 2-bedroom rental in Corbin ever since, which was fine, but was also a cost they were carrying into their 60s with no end in sight. Dana had a house, her husband's family had helped with the down payment. Cole had an apartment he paid for with a job he liked well enough. Mom mentioned once, at Easter, that they'd looked at a house on Maple and it was a little out of their range, but wasn't it lovely, and I drove past it on the way home and it was lovely. A small brick ranch, single story, good bones, a covered porch, a yard big enough for a garden. I called a real estate agent on a Tuesday and made an offer by Thursday. I put it in my parents' names. I paid the down payment out of my savings and arranged a mortgage payment that was $200 less than their rent, so they'd come out ahead on the monthly. I had a bow tied around the key when I handed it to them at Thanksgiving dinner that year. My father cried. I have held on to that image for 3 years because it felt, in that moment, like proof that the giving had landed. That it meant what I wanted it to mean. My mother held the key like it was a bird and said, "Nora, how did we get so lucky to have you?" And Dana sat across the table and said, "That's so generous, Nora," in the voice she uses when someone does something she feels she should have thought of first. And Cole said, "So does this mean you're paying the mortgage too?" He was joking. Mostly. I paid the mortgage too. Not all of it. Half. I covered half the mortgage payment for 2 years, because their income didn't stretch to the full amount and I didn't want them to struggle in a house I'd chosen for them. I told myself this was temporary, just until Dad got steadier on his feet again. I told myself the same thing I'd been telling myself since I was 14, this is just what family does, and it will even out, and the evening out doesn't have to come in the form of money. I just wanted to be chosen. That's the simplest thing I can tell you. Not paid back. Not thanked. Just chosen. Put first, once, on a day that mattered to me the way every weekend in Gatlinburg and every babysitting emergency mattered to Dana. I got engaged on a Tuesday night in February. James proposed in the kitchen of our apartment, with a ring he'd saved 18 months for, and my grandmother's pearl earrings that his mother had tracked down the family of and bought back for $40 from an estate sale. And I said yes before he finished the sentence, and we stood in the kitchen laughing and crying in equal measure. The wedding was set for September. 9 months out. Enough time to plan something beautiful and small. 40 people in a little stone church outside Brentwood, a dinner at a restaurant we loved, nothing excessive. I called my parents that same Tuesday night. Mom answered and I told her and she said, "Oh, Nora, I'm so happy for you," and her voice was warm and real and I believed it. "Will you both be there?" I asked. Not joking. Asking. Because I had learned to ask directly by then, to not assume the answer was obvious just because the answer should have been obvious. "Of course," Mom said. "Of course we will, sweetheart. Try to keep us away." The wedding invitations went out in June, cream stock with navy lettering, James's handwriting on the envelopes, because his handwriting is better than mine in the particular way that matters for envelopes, with a RSVP deadline of August 15th. My parents' envelope went out with the rest. I sent it to the brick ranch on Maple Street, the house I'd bought and half paid for, with a first-class stamp and a response card that required only a checkbox and a signature. August 15th came and went. The response card didn't come back. I told myself the mail was slow. I told myself my parents didn't understand that the RSVP was required, not suggested, because they had not been to a wedding with a formal RSVP in many years. I called and left a message on a Thursday. Mom called back Sunday. "We're coming, honey. Don't worry about the card. We'll be there." She said it with the comfortable certainty of someone confirming an obvious fact, which should have reassured me and instead left a small cold draft I couldn't account for. I mentioned it to my maid of honor, Becca, who had known me since nursing school, and who had a talent for saying the thing I was working my way toward without making me feel stupid for not having said it yet. "Have you told them how important this is?" she asked. "It's my wedding, Becca. It's self-evident." She looked at me the way she looks at me when I'm being smart and wrong at the same time. "You have a family that needs things spelled out, Nora. Spell it out." I called again in mid-August. Dad answered, which was unusual. Dad usually let Mom manage the phone. "We're planning on it," he said. "Dana's kids have a thing that weekend, but we'll figure it out." A thing. I filed that sentence the way I'd been filing sentences like it for 30 years, under the heading of probably nothing, because the alternative, that my parents might actually weigh a grandchild's thing against their daughter's wedding, was a thought I wasn't willing to complete. The thing was a soccer tournament. I found this out from Cole, who called me in late August in the particular way he calls when he has information he's decided I need and isn't sure how to give. He'd heard Mom and Dad talking about the schedule. Dana's youngest had a tournament on the Friday through Sunday of my wedding weekend, and Dana and her husband Kevin had been planning a trip to Gatlinburg the same weekend. The trip they'd apparently had in the calendar for months. And they needed someone to watch the kids for those 3 days, and Mom and Dad had said yes without apparent awareness that September 14th was my wedding date. Or with awareness. I still don't know which. Mom knows it's the same weekend, right? I asked Cole. Yeah, she knows. A pause. And? Cole was quiet for a moment. I think she thinks it'll be fine. She thinks Dana needs her more right now. I put the phone down after that call and sat in my kitchen for a long time. James was at work. The apartment was quiet. Outside, September was just starting to think about arriving, the light going a little sideways in the afternoons, the evenings coming sooner. I thought about what my mother's voice sounded like when she said of course we'll be there. I thought about whether she'd meant it when she said it and changed her mind later, or whether she'd meant something different by of course than I had. I thought about the water heater in January when I was 14. I thought about the $14,000 in medical bills. I thought about the bow tied around the key at Thanksgiving dinner, and my father's face, and my mother saying, "How did we get so lucky to have you?" Then I thought about Dana's kids' soccer tournament, and Gatlinburg, and a response card that never came back. I called my mother directly that evening. I had decided to be the person Becca was right to tell me to be, the person who spelled things out. "Mom, I need to know if you and Dad are coming to my wedding." Not planning on it. Not working on it. Coming. She was quiet for a beat that was one beat too long. "Nora, it's complicated right now. Dana needs us with the kids that weekend. Kevin's taking her to that trip they postponed twice, and it would really mean a lot to her, and we don't have anyone else who can. Mom. Watch the kids, and they are so young still, and the tournament. Mom." She stopped. "Are you coming to my wedding?" Another pause. I counted 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when someone is answering a yes or no question. "We're going to try to make it work." I understood going to try the way I understood every soft sentence my family had ever used to carry a hard meaning. It meant no. It meant they had already decided, and the decision wasn't me. I said goodnight. I said I loved her, because I did, and I hung up. James came home an hour later, and found me at the kitchen table. I told him. He sat down across from me and took both my hands and didn't say anything for a long time, which is one of the things I love most about him. He knows when the answer isn't words. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. I thought about it for a long moment. "Get married," I said. "On September 14th. With or without them." He squeezed my hands. "Then that's what we're doing." What I didn't tell him yet, what I was still assembling in the back of my mind, piece by piece, the way I'd been assembling things my whole life, was that the wedding was only the beginning of what I needed to figure out. The week after the phone call with Mom, I drove to Brentwood on a Thursday afternoon and sat down with my real estate attorney, a precise, no-nonsense woman named Carol Hines, who had handled the house purchase 3 years earlier and who had, at the time, suggested several structures for the arrangement that I had waved off, because they had felt unnecessarily formal for a gift to family. I told Carol I wanted to understand my options. She pulled up the file. The house on Maple Street was titled in my parents' names, as I had wanted. The mortgage, however, was structured differently. I was a co-borrower on the note, because my parents' income alone hadn't qualified them for the loan. My credit, my income, my debt-to-income ratio had carried the application. My name wasn't on the deed, but it was on the loan. I had known this. I had signed the loan documents. What I had not spent much time thinking about, in the warmth and satisfaction of the giving, was what that meant in practical terms. It meant that for 3 years, I had been making half the mortgage payment on a house, in which I had no ownership interest, in service of a financial obligation that was attached to my credit. If my parents defaulted on the loan, my credit would suffer. If the house sold, I would have no claim to the proceeds. I had structured the gift as purely and completely as it was possible to structure a gift, all responsibility on my side, all benefit on theirs. I had also, Carol noted, made a paper trail of every payment. This was not intentional on my part. It was simply how I manage money. Every payment I'd made was in my records, with a description, mortgage contribution, Maple Street. 3 years of records. 2 years of full half payment, plus the down payment, plus the transaction costs I'd covered at closing. Carol set her pen down and looked at me. "What are you actually asking me, Nora?" I thought about how to answer that for a moment. "I'm asking whether the arrangement I made is reversible." She looked at the file. "The deed is in their names." If they refuse to cooperate, you'd have to file suit to establish a resulting trust or unjust enrichment claim based on your financial contributions. That's litigating against your parents. I'm not asking about forcing anything, I said. I'm asking whether there's a version of this where I stop. She understood. You co-signed the mortgage. You can't remove yourself from the loan without refinancing. For them to refinance, they'd need to qualify on their own income. Can they? Carol glanced at the original application numbers. Not at the current rate environment. Not without a co-signer. I sat with that. So if I stopped making contributions, and they couldn't cover the full payment, and they couldn't refinance me out. The loan goes delinquent, Carol said evenly. Affects your credit and theirs. Eventually the bank moves to foreclose. She paused. That's not a threat you want to make and not follow through on. I'm not making a threat, I said. I'm understanding the situation. She nodded. What do you want to do? Here is what I had come to understand, sitting in that attorney's office on a Thursday afternoon. I had not bought my parents a house. I had bought myself a position. A position of usefulness, so complete, and so load-bearing that the structure couldn't stand without me. And for 3 years, I had been so busy being the thing that held it up, that I had not once asked what I was getting in exchange. I was getting nothing I had not been getting my whole life. The Noras so good to us at Sunday dinner. The appreciation. The sense of being needed, which I had confused, with a consistency that would embarrass me if I let it, for the sense of being loved. My parents had decided not to come to my wedding so that Dana could go to Gatlinburg. They had not called to apologize or explain. They had delivered the information through Cole and expected me to absorb it the way I absorbed everything, quietly, gracefully, with a reassurance that it was fine, that I understood, that I knew they loved me even if this particular expression of love left me standing in a church parking lot in a wedding dress without them. I was 32 years old. I had been absorbing it since I was 14. I thought about the bow on the key. I thought about my father's face. And I thought, for the first time in 3 years, about what that house actually cost me, not in dollars, but in the currency I'd been spending my whole life without accounting for it. I want to notify them, I said to Carol, that I'm going to stop making contributions to the mortgage, effective immediately after the wedding. And I want them to understand, in writing, what that means for the loan and for them. Carol looked at me for a moment. They're going to need to refinance or sell. Yes, I said. Or you stay on the loan and they default. I understand. She picked up her pen. I'll draft a letter. I drove home with the windows down. September light going sideways, just like I'd remembered it the week before. James was making dinner when I got back, the good kind, the kind that takes longer than it needs to because he cooks the way he does everything, with more care than is strictly required, which is probably why I married him. I sat at the kitchen counter, and watched him, and thought about what showing up for someone actually looks like from the inside. Not the performing of it. Not the being thanked for it. Just the doing of it, year after year, in the small specific ways that don't make good stories at Sunday dinner, but make up the entire substance of a life shared. He hadn't asked me to buy anyone a house. He hadn't asked me to wire money home, or cover medical bills. He had asked me to marry him in our kitchen, with a ring he'd saved for, and my grandmother's pearl earrings his mother helped track down, and he had held my hands in silence when I told him my parents had chosen Gatlinburg over our wedding. He turned around from the stove and saw my face and said, "You okay?" "I'm figuring something out," I said. "Take your time," he said, and turned back to the stove. I realized, been taking my whole life. September 14th was a Saturday, and the morning was exactly as gold and cool as it sounds when I say it now, because September in Tennessee sometimes cooperates with the life you're trying to build in it. I was dressed by 8. Becca had my hair pinned up in the style I'd chosen 6 months earlier, and the dress was the one I'd found on the third try, simple and real and not pretending to be anything it wasn't. I looked in the mirror in the church's bridal room, which smelled like old wooden candle wax, and I thought I looked like myself, which felt like the right thing to look like on this particular morning. Becca's phone buzzed at 8:47. She looked at the screen. Her face did the thing faces do when the person holding them is trying to decide how to hold the news they've just received. I watched her make the decision, the small tightening around the eyes that means tell her straight. "Your mom just called me," Becca said. "They are not coming, Nora. Dana's youngest is sick and they are the only ones who can watch the kids. Your mom said she tried to call you but your phone's off." My phone was off, because that is what you do with your phone in the hour before your wedding. I held my bouquet. White ranunculus, the same flowers my grandmother had carried, because my mother had mentioned it once and I had written it down. I had chosen them specifically so my mother would see them and remember telling me. She wasn't going to see them. I sat down on the small bench in the corner of the bridal room, and I let myself feel it for exactly the amount of time it needed to be felt. Not the long form of it. I'd been feeling the long form for 30 years. Just the specific, named, final weight of this particular confirmation. Then I stood up. "Let's get married," I said to Becca. The ceremony was everything I wanted it to be. James was at the altar when the doors opened, and the look on his face when he saw me is something I will take with me every day of my life. 40 people, who had driven from distances to be in that room, filled it with warmth and attention, and the specific, sustaining love of people who chose to be somewhere because they wanted to be there. My father was not among them. My mother was not among them. I married James Callahan at 10:15 on a Saturday morning in September, and I meant every word I said, and the joy in that room was real. The reception was beautiful. We danced. We ate. I said thank you to everyone and I meant that too, and somewhere around the third song, the missing presence of 2 people became something I could carry rather than something that was carrying me. It was after the reception, in the parking lot, when the last of the guests had gone and Becca was overseeing the caterers loading the last of the things into a van, that my father's car pulled into the lot. He had driven 2.5 hours. Alone. Mom hadn't come, she'd stayed with the kids while Dad made the drive, which told me everything about the geometry of that decision and who had made it. He was in his good shirt, the navy one he wore to funerals and special occasions, and his face had the look of a man who has been driving with something uncomfortable in his chest for 2.5 hours, and hasn't figured out how to set it down. He said my name when he saw me, still in my dress, bouquet in my hand, and I could tell from the way he said it that he had a speech prepared and that the speech was not going to be adequate for what he was looking at. "Nora," he said. "I'm sorry we couldn't." "Dad." He stopped. I looked at him for a moment. He was 61 years old and he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. He looked like a man who had been tired for a long time and had gotten used to the one daughter who never required him to notice it. I reached into my bag. I had put the keys there that morning before I left the apartment, the way you pack something you know you're going to need. A single brass key on a simple ring, the copy I had kept when I handed my parents the keys to Maple Street 3 years ago. I held it out to him. "What is this?" he said. "The spare to the house," I said. "I'm going to need you to take it to Carol Hines's office on Monday. She'll explain what's happening." He looked at the key. Then at me. "Nora, what does that mean?" "It means I stopped," I said. Not with anger. Not with triumph. Just with the plain, clean truth of it. I stopped, Dad. I should have stopped a long time ago, and I didn't, because stopping felt like not loving you. But I've been confusing those two things for 30 years, and I can't afford to keep making that mistake. He looked at the key in his palm. The house, he said, is in your names, I said. And Carol will walk you through what you need to do next. It's going to require some decisions on your end. But those decisions are yours to make. Not mine. He looked up at me with an expression that was the most honest thing I had seen on his face in years. Not anger. Not blame. Something closer to the thing that was underneath both of those, the dawning understanding of what had been holding up a structure he had mistaken for solid ground. I should have been here, he said. Yes, I said. I'm sorry. I know, I said. And I did. The sorry was real. I could hear the realness in it. But Dad, a sorry doesn't change what I've decided. I'm not ending anything. I'm just stopping doing things that cost me what today cost me. He closed his hand around the key. I kissed him on the cheek. Then I walked back to where James was waiting by our car, his jacket off, his tie loosened, that look on his face that meant he'd seen the whole thing from 20 feet away, and had given me the space to handle it myself. Ready? He said. Yes, I said. We drove away in rice that Becca had thrown with slightly more enthusiasm than the situation required, and I didn't look back. Carol Hines sent the letter on the Monday after the wedding. Registered mail, return receipt requested, the way documents go when they need to be undeniable. It was precise and factual and contained no accusations, because Carol Hines is not an accusatory woman. It was simply an accounting. A 3-year record of Nora Beth Callahan's financial contributions toward the property at 412 Maple Street, Corbin, Kentucky, including the down payment, the closing costs, and 42 months of mortgage co-contributions totaling, when Carol added them up in clean black type, a number that surprised even me. $94,000. Over 3 years. That was what I had put into the house on Maple Street. What I had thought of as helping out and covering the gap, and just what family does had, in actual aggregated dollars, amounted to nearly $100,000. The letter further noted that as co-borrower on the mortgage, Nora Beth Callahan was giving formal notice of her intention to cease contributions to the monthly payment, effective immediately, and that the co-borrowers, my parents, would need to refinance the loan into their names alone, sell the property, or make arrangements to address the payment gap within 90 days, after which Carol's office would advise her client on next steps. The letter did not say or else. It didn't need to. The math was self-evident. My mother called me on Wednesday. I let it ring twice, then answered, because I am not the kind of person who uses silence as a weapon when words will do. Nora, what is this letter? Her voice had the specific quality it gets when she is frightened, but presenting as indignant. What have you done? I've stopped making mortgage contributions, Mom. Carol's letter explains the situation. This is our home. I know. Which is why I gave Carol 90 days instead of 30. A pause. You can't do this. We can't pay the full amount, you know that. I know, I said. Which is why you have a few options. You can refinance if you can qualify. You can sell and use the equity to find somewhere you can afford on your own. Or you can talk to Dana about whether she can help. The silence after that last sentence had a very particular texture. The texture of a woman realizing that the daughter she had organized her family around helping had been financed entirely by the other daughter, and that the question of what Dana would contribute when the bill came due had never once been asked. Nora, sweetheart. Her voice changed registers. The frightened but indignant dropped away, and something more genuine came through. We love you. You know we love you. I know, Mom, I said. I love you too. This isn't about that. Then what is it about? I thought about how to answer. I thought about the response card that never came back. I thought about going to try. I thought about a navy shirt and a parking lot and a man holding a key with the particular look of someone who has just understood the load-bearing structure of a thing he has been standing on without examining. It's about the fact that I got married on Saturday, I said. And you weren't there. And I've been making it possible for you to live in a house you couldn't afford for 3 years and nobody, not you, not Dana, not anyone, has ever once made it possible for me to be first. Just once. Just on the day it mattered most. My mother was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Dana needed us, she finally said. Not as a defense. More like she was tasting the words for the first time from this angle. She always does, I said. And I always handle it. Those two things have been true at the same time for 30 years and nobody ever thought about what it meant for me that they were both true. Another long silence. What do we do? She asked. It was the first time in my memory that my mother had asked me that question without an emergency attached to it. Not what do we do about the furnace, or the medical bills, or the leak in the roof. What do we do, asked plainly, as a question about the future and not a crisis to be managed. You figure out the house, I said. That's your decision. And when you're ready to talk, really talk, not about the house, about us, I'll be here. But I'm not managing the fix for you this time. She said she understood. I think she did. I think understanding and doing something with the understanding are two different things, and I'm still waiting to learn which one she's going to do. But I've stopped needing the answer to be mine to provide. Dad called that same week. Thursday, late afternoon. He didn't talk around it the way Mom had. That number in Carol's letter, he said. 94,000. Yes. We didn't, he stopped. Started again. We didn't know it was that much. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that for a moment. Because I thought the love was self-evident, I said. The same way I thought the wedding was self-evident. He was quiet for a long time. I drove there too late, he said. Yes. The whole drive down, I kept thinking about what you said. That you should have stopped a long time ago. His voice was rough. I kept thinking about when that would have been. And every time I picked a year, I thought about something you'd done for us that year that I'd just taken for granted. I didn't fill the silence. I'd been filling silences my whole life. I let him hold this one. You deserved better than we gave you, he said. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if there's a fixing of it. He stopped again. I should have been there, Nora. I should have put you first. I held my phone in both hands, sitting on the couch in my apartment, the same apartment where James had proposed in the kitchen, and I felt something loosen that had been tight for so long I'd forgotten it was supposed to give. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me, Dad, I told him. Yeah, he said. I know. I'm sorry it took me 61 years. The house on Maple Street sold in December. My parents listed it with a real estate agent in Corbin, took what equity there was after the mortgage balance, and used it to move into a smaller rental, a one-bedroom in a newer building, something they could actually afford on their own income without anyone covering the gap. I don't know if Dana helped. I didn't ask. That conversation, whatever it was, happened without me, which is the thing about deciding to stop managing other people's arrangements. The arrangements still happen, you just stop being the engine running them. Mom told me the new apartment was nice. She said it like someone saying a true thing they hadn't expected to be true. She said the bathroom was bigger than she thought and the kitchen had better light. She sounded, For the first time in a long time, like a woman living inside her own life rather than someone else's accounting of it. I have not given her money since October. This is the hardest part to tell you, not because I regret it, but because it sits so strangely in my chest, the space where the habit used to be. 30 years of reflexive giving leaves a kind of phantom, an impulse that fires and then finds nothing to land on. I feel it sometimes when the phone rings on a Sunday. I feel it when I see a number I don't recognize from a Kentucky area code. I feel it less now than I did in October. I expect I'll feel it less still in another year. James and I had a proper honeymoon in December, a week in Asheville that we had postponed from September while everything settled. We hiked in the mornings and ate well at night, and I slept without the low-grade vigilance I hadn't known I was carrying until I stopped carrying it. He noticed. He didn't say much about it, because he is not a man who fills space with words when the space is doing something useful on its own. But one evening, walking back from dinner in the cold blue Asheville dark, he took my hand and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" "Lighter," he said. "Like you put something down." I had put something down. The exact shape of it is still something I'm learning to describe. It wasn't just the money, though the money was part of it. It was the belief, the one I'd been holding since I was 14 and the water heater quit, that my value in my family was contingent on my usefulness to it. That being needed was the same as being chosen. That love, the real kind, the kind I kept reaching toward, was something you earned by never letting anyone see the cost of the earning. Dana called me in November. I won't tell you we had a beautiful conversation, because we didn't. What we had was an honest one, which is harder and more durable. She said she knew, had known for years, that I'd been carrying more than my share. She said she'd told herself it was what I wanted. I told her I'd told myself that too, which was why neither of us was entirely wrong and why that somehow made it worse rather than better. She said she was sorry. I believe she meant it. I told her that what I needed from her wasn't sorriness. It was the willingness to be in my life the way I'd been in hers, which meant showing up when it was inconvenient and putting me first occasionally, and not waiting for a crisis to remember I existed. She said she'd try. I said I'd let her. That's where we are. It is not a resolution so much as a beginning, the kind that requires both people to keep making the same choice in small ways over a long period of time. I have made peace with not knowing how it turns out. What I know is this. On a Saturday in September, I married a man who shows up. Who has never once needed to be managed into being present. Who held my hands in silence the night I told him my parents weren't coming and who drove me away from my own reception in Ricebecca through too hard, and who noticed, in December in Asheville, that I was lighter. I know that the work of showing up for someone is invisible until it stops. That the people who do it quietly and without keeping score are the ones who most need to learn, eventually, that quietly and without scorekeeping doesn't mean without limit. I know that handing someone a key is a gesture. And that handing it back is a statement. And that sometimes the statement is the most loving thing you've ever done for yourself, even when it looks, from the outside, like something colder than love. The pearl earrings I wore on my wedding day are in a small dish on my dresser now. I put them there the night we got home from Asheville, next to the brass key I had kept from the house on Maple Street, the extra copy that never made it to Carol's letter, because I kept it instead. I'm not sure why I kept it. Maybe because some part of me knew I'd want something tangible to mark the moment I stopped. I pick it up sometimes. The square bow, the worn brass, the tooth cut for a door that belongs to someone else now. It doesn't feel like loss anymore. It feels like the weight of a decision well made. The particular, honest heaviness of a thing you chose on purpose, for yourself, finally. Some things you carry for 30 years and think that's what love requires. And some things you set down, on a parking lot, on a September morning, and discover that love, the kind you were looking for all along, was always going to be lighter than that. That's my story. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people you loved most, you're not alone. Tell me where you're listening from below. Subscribe to Sweet Payback Stories for more stories where the quiet ones get the last word.